next card that we're going to work on is this Snowman one here. So we're going to use some watercolor crayons for this. These happen to be ones from Stampin' Up! That I got many years ago. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but there are many companies that make them. What I like about them is they have a little bit of opacity to them. They're not quite as transparent as the re-inkers I used on the Santa card. The other thing that we're going to do is once our painting is completely dried, we're going to be adding some texture paste and some glitter to the snowman to give him a little bit of texture. So this time I already checked to make sure that I am going to be stamping on the flat side of my watercolor paper. And I'm inking my stamp. I want to make sure that it's got lots of ink on it. And you may notice the grid marks on my blocks. You can find some that don't have it as well, but sometimes it's really handy if you line up something that you want to have straight up and use that as a bit of a guide as you're working. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the shading. Oh, 1 second, I wanted to use this one here for that. I'm working on the shading underneath the ornament and greenery. So the thing with the watercolor crayons, I could scribble them onto a piece of plastic and color with them. I could scribble onto my watercolor paper and then color with them. But what I tend to like doing is just using my brush right to them and getting the color that way. If I happen to do that and I have a little bit too much color, I can take a paper towel and dab the excess off. And then same as the re-inker, I put my crayon where I want the color to be the darkest, and then I blend it out and fade it out a little bit. And I typically like to have it, especially with this background part, so it's faded out to nothing. So if you need more paint, you just go back to the crayon and get a little bit more. And for this particular one, I am painting anywhere there are crosshatch marks underneath the ornament for some shadow. And I don't want a lot of shadow. I don't want a really dark shadow. I just want very light, just a hint of the shading underneath it. Anytime that I want to take some of the excess paint off of my brush, I just wipe it onto my paper towel. It will suck it right off. The other thing that I do is I keep my scraps of watercolor paper when I'm trimming things down. So if I'm working on something, and I've already done this one obviously, so I know what colors I want to use and what I want it to look like. But if while I'm working, I'm wondering whether a color is going to look nice with it, I'll go take my brush, let's try this one here, and I'll put it on my thing there, and I can kind of see without actually committing to my actual project here. So I am going to use this one here. I'm going to put a little bit on the scarf and rotate your image so that it's easier for you to get at. And what I'm trying to do is, so I've got wet paint here, so I'm trying to work away from that. I don't want to be putting wet right next to wet. These crayons are less likely to bleed than the re-inkers are, but I still want to try to work on drier areas so that I get clean lines outside. If there's any wetness outside of it, it's going to start to bleed a little bit and you'll have a little bit less control over it. And the berries here. And basically for the berries, I'm just going around the edges, and then I'm taking the excess of the color off of my brush and then just filling it in. And if after doing that I want a little bit more, like this here, I want it a little bit darker here, I can go back and add that, take the excess off, and then blend that a little bit in. And you do want to have a little bit of contrast. You want to have some lights and darks. And the nice thing with these images is with the crosshatches on the images, it shows you exactly where the shading is. So you don't even need to figure it out for yourself where you want the shading to go. All right, so those berries are done. I'm cleaning my brush off. And I am going to do some of the greenery. So taking the lightest green and I'm going to cover the holly with it. And I typically start from the inside wherever I want it darkest and then work my way out. And then I want a little bit darker in the center. So for this one, I'm actually just gonna color some of the darker down the spine while it's still wet. And then I'm gonna use my brush to blend it out. So I'll still get that harsh line there. That's what happens when you do go directly onto the paper. You get a little bit more harsh lines. But for this particular one, I don't mind it as much. It really depends on what image or what you are coloring. Because there's definitely some things that you wouldn't want really harsh lines on, but there's some that you would, that it's suitable for it. All right, so again, darkest in the center. And then use my paintbrush to blend it out while everything is still wet. Clean my brush off. This particular set that I have didn't actually have a black for the hat, so I'm just using a navy. But there's enough colors going on that it works. So again, do the darkest where the cross hatches are on the image, and then blend that out. I don't need to do anything else on the snowman other than his carrot nose, because we're going to be putting texture paste over the rest of them anyways. I'm going to do the yellow for the straw for the broom. And then a little bit, I don't remember which brown I used actually, but I'm going to do a couple lines here. And again, it works perfectly on the broom because there would be lines with the straw. And now for the pine needles here. So I'm taking my lightest of the greens. I'm going to just do a layer lightly over top, starting at the center and brushing a little bit out so that it's darkest in the center. And then I'm going to do that for this branch of the pine needles as well. And that one there. And then I'm going to take my darker color, and you're just following the lines of the image. You could, if you want, go in and do some coloring. The thing with coloring directly onto the paper, you don't really get too many lights and darks, and it sometimes is a little bit harsh. So I'm just doing it with the brush for this one because I want to make sure that I get it darker in the center and lighter as I pull my brush out. I just want to have some of the contrast in there. If there's no lights and darks, it tends to look a little bit fake. All right, so that is done. I realized I didn't get a little bit of the shading color in here. There should be some there. And the last thing to do is the ornaments. So the ornaments I'm actually doing with the pewter perfect pearls that I have sitting in my tray here. I'm just going to go all the way around. Do a little bit heavier where the ornaments have some shading to them. So once this pewter is completely dry, I have some green patina perfect pearls that I'm going to do just the detail on the ornament, and then after that I just used a gold pen for the last part. So I'm going to let this completely dry, and then I'm just going to add those green lines to it, but I'll see you in the next video where we're going to start to add some of the texture paste.